This is maybe the big headline of his coming foreign policy. Unpredictability. Surprises are coming. Is he going to solve it? China catching up and even moving beyond is a threat to the economic might, to the technological might of the US. The bloodiest conflict of Europe since the Second World War, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now we have been seeing many conflicts around the semiconductor industry. Perhaps this is the most important one for the US and for the Chinese, for both of them. The CEOs, they had to worry about emerging technologies, the risks, plus the opportunities, but you need to add geopolitics to the mix now.
Ahmed, welcome back to the Multipliers Podcast.
Thank you, Mehdi. I'm very happy to be invited once again. Thank you.
You're the first guest to come back to round two.
I'm lucky.
We're lucky to have you.
Thanks a lot.
And I'm sure we're going to have a round three and a round four.
Hopefully. Very hopefully.
For those who haven't seen the first time you were on the podcast, can you please give us a brief intro about yourself?
Sure. Actually, Mehdi, I'm a consultant in geopolitics and geoeconomics. And I also teach the topics in the Paris campus of SK Business School, so in France. So this is a brief of what I do in life.
And 2025 has just started. So where do you see the geopolitical scene going on?
Mehdi, 2024 was a difficult year. So for everybody, in 6 days, we are going to have the second term of President Trump. So this is going to be maybe the big headline for the whole year, because his foreign policy will impact many countries, will impact alliances, trade treaties, and so on. So what I think we have to expect many surprises, maybe some big events, maybe some conflicts will be solved. And I mean by this, maybe the Russia-Ukraine war. We can talk about it now. The conflict in the Middle East, it could be either put on a halt, frozen, maybe partially solved. We will see. We do remember that back in his first term between 2017 and 2020, he managed to sign or to push for the Abraham Accords, which was historical accords for the region. And now we are seeing some historical changes. We saw this seismic or this earthquake that took place in the region with the fall of Assad. Can we expect a part two of Abraham Accords? Yes, we can. There is a high probability that some regional powers or regional countries could join in also. We can expect some maybe intensification of the trade war that he launched back in 2018 against China. Mm-hmm. Actually, I will explain this concept. Trump is considered an economic nationalist, a protectionist president. He decided to put the interests of America in advance with his policy of America first. Produce American, buy American, try to reduce maximum trade deficit because they had up to 300 or even up to $400 billion of trade deficit per year with China. The same the EU is having also with China. Lately, they reduced it by around 1/3, but still they need to do many more efforts to do it, to reach, an acceptable situation. So Trump, back in 2018, he was worried that Chinese producers were making some American producers bankrupt. So he decided to protect American businesses by imposing some kind of tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, sanctions, export restrictions against China and against many other countries. The other countries were treated lightly. Later on, they solved their issues with the US. However, on China, he imposed tariffs on about $250 billion worth of Chinese goods. The Chinese did retaliate by imposing some tariffs, about $110 billion of American goods. That was what we called the beginning of the trade war between China and the United States back in 2018. 7 years later, 6.5 years later now, Trump is coming back. The trade war did not stop actually during President Biden's term. Thank you, Mehdi. It did not stop. It even continued. He also imposed some other tariffs, especially on electric vehicles from China. But he was talking about 60% of tariffs on Chinese products. lately he talked about 10%. He's unpredictable. This is maybe the big headline of his coming foreign policy. Unpredictability. Surprises are coming. Some of them could be really good. Some of them could be maybe a bit difficult for some partners or some foes. So if we come back to the trade war, he is threatening tariffs on Chinese goods. He's threatening a 10% universal tariff on everybody's goods. So from all the countries of the world, it will impact the global trade. The growth of trade will be reduced by about $135 billion. So it will continue to grow, but $135 billion will be taken out of the equation. This is just to explain it. So China might lose around 0.68% of growth. The US might lose also something around 0.7%. Then we can have the EU countries. Germany will be impacted the most if this 10% universal tariff would be put in place, because Germany is the biggest trade partner from the EU to the US. Other countries can benefit from this because they will replace what is lost in exports. For example, the automobile industry. The Japanese could export more automobiles to the US, and this would help the GDP to grow by around 0.2%.
Why is the Japanese? How can the Japanese benefit?
I will explain myself. We used to have this NAFTA. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
You know, some vehicles assembly was coming from Mexico. So the NAFTA was modified. It became now called the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. So there were some new clauses that were put in place to advance American interests. And of course, they are a little bit unfair to Canadian and mainly to Mexican producers. So some exports from Mexico would not arrive to the US. They could be replaced by Japanese exports, especially in the automobile industry, because there are some automobile factories in Mexico that could suffer from the new tariffs of Trump. This is one of the.
He threatened actually the Mexicans.
He did
that. That was before he got elected, because they were going to allow the Chinese to build their EVs there, and he said, "If you do, we're going to tax them by 1,000%." Exactly.
The Chinese are trying to circumvent the sanctions and the tariffs by building factories in other countries. Actually, it's not only Mexico's case. They are trying to do the same in Turkey, and BYD signed, I think it's a $1 billion deal to build a factory in Turkey. They are also building factories in Hungary, in the middle of the EU. So it will be Hungarian made, to be Turkish made. So, and they are trying to also building factories in Mexico to circumvent American sanctions. So he threatened the Mexicans and the Canadians and the Chinese lately. He said that he would impose around 25% import tariffs on Mexican and Canadian products because they need to fight this drug or immigration problem, illegal immigration. You know, sometimes Trump threatens hoping to have a better negotiating position. So by threatening to impose high tariffs, he will push his partners to make amendments or to do some concessions before the 25% tariffs or others are put in place. So this is mainly his big strategy. The trade war would be intensified most likely. So everybody should brace for an intensification. Then another aspect that could be very interesting is the big conflicts, the bloodiest conflict of Europe since the Second World War, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Is he going to solve it? Is he going to find a compromise that could satisfy both parties? This is the big question. He has been promising that he will come to power and he would immediately solve it. Realistically speaking, of course, we cannot expect solving such a conflict in 24 hours. As you were saying, he's a showman. He likes to talk big, but he has been talking about a period of 3 to 6 months lately to enable his administration to find good conditions that could satisfy both sides of the conflict. If he manages to do so, he would do a big favor to Europe. He would not. He would prevent Russia from aligning further with China, because this is a big question mark. Americans, or the American administration of Trump, would not wish Russia to align to the maximum with China. China is the US biggest competitor, strategic adversary, with its booming economy. When we say booming, I mean, it's not as booming as before, but still, they are the biggest threat economically to the US, technologically to the US, and even on the longer term, militarily speaking, they are catching up fast. They are building ships for their navy on a much faster scale than what the US is doing. They are also building ships for the civilian industry. Ships on a much, much faster scale than the US industry. There was a study that appeared recently. It's a study that talked about, I think it was from Brookings Institute, if I'm not mistaken. It's about a Chinese policy called Made in China 2025. This Made in China strategy, Made in China 2025, appeared in 2015. So it was a 10-year plan to innovate Chinese production. So they cited, I think either it was around 11 or 13 or a bit more of indicators about the most advanced technologies, innovations. And the study shows that China caught up in most sectors, actually in practically all sectors. Either it became a world leader, I think around 4 or 5 of them, and for the rest, it became on par with the leading producers, except for one sector where they are still behind, which is the civilian airline industry. You see China catching up and even moving beyond is a threat to the economic might, to the technological might of the US. And now we have been seeing many conflicts around the microchips, the semiconductor industry. Perhaps this is the most important one for the US and for the Chinese, for both of them. The US saw that the Chinese are developing very fast in this field, and they decided, as part of this big trade war, of this big tech competition between the two nations, to restrict China's access to the latest technology, machine tools or licenses, machine tools that would come from companies like the biggest one based in the Netherlands. I think it's called ATSML, if I'm not mistaken. And the licenses to use such tools, which are coming from US companies, they are cooperating with their own allies, like the Japanese, like the Koreans, South Koreans, and Netherlands, and so on, to prevent China from getting access to the latest technology in semiconductor industry. So this is a fight that will keep going on under Trump to try to prevent China from surpassing the US in the innovation.
But the Chinese are not lazy people, right?
Not
and from what we've seen in terms of planning for the next 10, 15, 20 years, they have surpassed the West, and which is why their cars are cheaper, their solar panels are cheaper. So even though the West now is trying to put them in a corner when it comes to semiconductors or microchips, okay, they're up for the challenge, and then eventually they will surpass them.
Definitely. Personally, I have no doubt that they will surpass the West in most technological advancements. As you said, they are not lazy at all. They are working hard since a long time. They have clear plans on what they want to achieve, where they want to go. If before China, actually it still remains for many sectors, the factory of the world, China decided 10 years ago that it's not quantity that matters, it's quality. It's the innovative industries, innovative technologies. So they understood the game. And even if you go to the military industry sector, you see that the 5th generation planes, you have only few countries that produce fifth generation stealth planes of Russia, China, the US, for example. But the Chinese, only around 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, for the first time, made a sixth generation model fly already. So it was impressive. Of course, the propaganda angle should always be taken into consideration. It was impressive by the design itself, which means there is some kind of a technological breakthrough. No other country managed to fly a prototype of a sixth generation. Even the Russians, who were thinking that in 2050 they would have their sixth generation fighter ready, definitely they were surprised by having a prototype flying in China already in 2024 or 2025. So it was either by the end of December or beginning of January. It was impressive. The Americans are not happy about it. They are worried. China could be not only a technological threat, but also a military threat with time. They have the human resources, and they have the technology, which is advancing, and the defense industry, which is also advancing. Actually, the defense industry is replacing, for example, Russia in many African nations. Russians are producing for their own war efforts now. So China is taking the opportunity to replace China to replace Russia in those historical partners of Russia in the arms industry. If we come back, to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we had the first theory that Trump would not like Russia to align with China totally, but there is another theory that was suggested lately by Chatham House. Chatham House released also an article called The World in 2025. What do they expect in terms of conflicts or geopolitical developments? They said that we should not also be surprised if the US would negotiate with China so that Beijing would put pressure on Russia because they are the biggest partner of Russia, to make some concessions regarding Ukraine in exchange for the US reducing their support to Taiwan. So you have two theories. Either make a deal with Russia to avoid aligning it further with China, or cooperate with Beijing to reduce the Russian threat in Europe. So this is one. What else? The Middle East. We have been witnessing actually the bloodiest conflict also of the Middle East since the old Arab-Israeli wars. We did not witness such a number of victims of death in the dozens of thousands since the late Arab-Israeli war. And even back then, we did not have that many casualties. So what might happen? What might happen in the Middle East? We saw that in Syria, the Assad regime fell after around 54 years in power. And I mean by this, the Assad family or the Ba'ath party in Syria. The fall was a big surprise to everybody. Nobody really expected it, especially that many countries were opening up again to the government or the regime of Bashar al-Assad. But what most likely, not confirmed yet, happened is that because Syria was under sanctions since 2011, for around 13 to 14 years of sanctions, this impacted their economy with Turkish support to the opposition, with other countries also supporting some other factions, and with Assad not managing to either keep his own supporters motivated or to revamp the economy or to work on the social level. He did not manage to do. There was a lack of motivation for his own troops to continue fighting. So they became exhausted after 13, 14 years, many big losses. Russians helped them a lot. Iran and its allies also helped them a lot. And we reach December 2024 with the first advancement of the opposition forces and the big cities like Aleppo, later on Hama, and Homs falling extremely fast. That was a sign of something going very bad for his government. What happened exactly, what kind of a deal practically took place, maybe the Russians most likely did negotiate with the Turkish so that their own military bases in Syria could be spared, at least in the beginning. And this is what we have been seeing. Nobody touched any Russian soldier in Syria. So we have now a new Syria, new authorities rebranding themselves, opening up to the neighboring countries, opening up to the West, and also opening up to Russia itself. The new head of the authorities, transition regime, Ahmed Al-Shara, who used to be known as Abu Muhammad Al-Julani, his military nickname. So Al-Shara now sent even a positive message to the Russians that we do not want you to leave Syria in that way, in those circumstances. And he said that Russia has been a strategic partner to Syria for many years. So he's just sending some positive messages even to his fiercest enemies, because the Russians participated in the Syrian war since 2015,
yes,
around 9 years. And lately we have been seeing Arab initiatives, like the one that took place in Saudi Arabia a couple of days ago. So the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the new authorities in Syria was invited along Arab countries, along some international representatives like the US and some Europeans, to come to see how they can support the new authorities to do this transition, how they can support the people of Syria, economically speaking, humanitarian speaking, to relieve maybe some sanctions, some restrictions. So something is going to change there.
And I'm sure Trump is going to have a say in this.
Definitely.
So we can easily say that 2025 is the year of Donald Trump.
Definitely. It will be the year of Donald Trump. He wants history to remember him as the deal maker, as the peacemaker. The Donald Trump legacy will be most likely reinforced in this year. This is the year where he will, in his first presidential term, definitely there were some historical moments and agreements, as we said, like the Abraham Accords, like the trade war, and so on. He also met Vladimir Putin at the time of heightened tensions. He met Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And so he did some things that were unexpected. But 2025 and the coming years will be most likely to cement his legacy, especially as he would like to see himself and that the world sees him as a deal maker. He's a pragmatic businessman and he's a pragmatic politician.
Ahmed, earlier, before we started the podcast, you were talking about some of the top geopolitical developments for 2025 under the EY report, and I found them very fascinating. So if you can just talk a bit about that, please.
Sure. Ernst & Young released in December 2024 their geostrategic outlook for 2025. In this outlook, they first compared between the 10 geopolitical developments of 23 and 24 and 25. They showed how some geopolitical developments or risks, depending on the situation, evolved from 23 through 24 till 25 to have the new developments, the new risks, the new opportunities in our coming year. So, for instance, I will just mention a few of them. In 2024, we had the biggest maybe development on the global scale, besides the Trump re-election. We can talk about the mega election year. So this was the year where we had the most elections in dozens and dozens of countries. I think it was around 60, maybe even a bit more than 60 countries. And the results of those elections will influence a lot 2025, because several populist leaders or parties gained power in this year. Trump is one of them. He is considered a populist leader, as well as an economic nationalist. Maybe you can come back to this economic nationalist term later on, because it's interesting to explain it. So there will be some populist decisions, some populist political moves, usually among the moves, we can see some restrictions on immigration, especially illegal immigration. We can see some more protectionist policies. Economically speaking, we talk about protectionism, which is part of this big concept of economic nationalism. So I will just explain before moving on to the other topics. Economic nationalism is a concept that appeared most likely the first time in 1841. It was a German and later on American economic theorist, diplomat, and other positions, Friedrich List, that came out with this concept in a famous book of him that appeared in 1841. He was a patriot who was worried and concerned about the pre-industrial state of his Germany back then. And of course, it was not called Germany. It was Prussia and the other small German states, because he was comparing with what was happening in the neighboring England. Back then, we were witnessing the first industrial revolution. The English had a strong industry, were well protected as an island, have a strong trade system. So they were gaining a lot and they were developing very fast. And that's why he thought that the best things to do is to deploy some protectionist measures, like some kind of barriers in the trade with others, not within the same nation. So the English had a nation state. Germany did not exist as Germany, did not exist as a nation state back then. So Trump is is a personality that could be also called an economic nationalist, because he's also thinking how to increase the wealth of his own nation, how to increase the number of jobs, the production, to decrease the deficit in trade with other nations. This also pushes us back to what we call the mercantilist policy of the 19th century. What is mercantilism? This is also protectionist measures. This is some countries which would like to keep their gold, keep their silver as maximum as possible by exporting more and by importing less, by putting some kind of barriers. So this is, again, the same policy is being applied again and again by Trump and by others. One big geopolitical development from the Ernst & Young geostrategic outlook was the influence of populism after the elections of 2024. So the influence in 2025. Another one is the emerging economies integration. We have been witnessing an interesting phenomenon. We have what we call the global south, and we have, maybe we can call it also the global north. Just to maybe some distinctions about them. The global north is mainly what we can call the developed nations, the US and many northern allies in Europe. To add to them, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, and so on. And the global south is mainly emerging economies. Sometimes we can call them also developing economies or emerging economies. This is mainly the countries that are in the south, plus add to them some countries that can be associated to the global south, not geographically part of them, which is China, which is also India, which is also Russia, which is closely associated because it has many partnerships with many countries in the south. So the global south is uniting more than ever. Some of the leading nations of the global south are looking for more say in the international affairs, in the international scene. So they are uniting under some groupings or organizations such as the BRICS. BRICS, everybody, I mean, we last time we talked about BRICS. Originally it was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is the BRICS. But later on, it developed and it invited several new members, such as the UAE, such as Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and just 1 week ago, Indonesia also joined. So now it's an expanded BRICS. Saudi Arabia was also invited to become a full member. So far, it did not decide to be 100% full member, but its status is even, stronger than the partner status, just between both.
But they're part of the whole monetary thing that they've done.
Yes, when they started,
It's all hush hush, by the way. Nobody's covering it in the media.
what's happening within the BRICS, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Because even first of all, Western media do not like to show in another international grouping than the G7 is becoming economically more representative and population-wise much bigger. You have India and China alone who represent how much? Around 2.7 billion?
Yeah.
Around 2.7 billion.
A third of the world, yeah.
Yes, that's just them. And then add to them now Indonesia. How many? And then add to them also Russia, which has also considered.
And Brazil.
And Brazil also, and Ethiopia and Egypt also. They are all populated, with big populations. So economically speaking, before Indonesia joining in, they represented around 35% of the GDP. But again, we always talk about the GDP. We always forget the purchasing power parity GDP, where if you count it, on paper, China is already surpassed the US by around 25%. If you compare the purchasing power,
really?
Yes.
Okay.
Since 2000, they already surpassed the US, economically speaking, China. But it's not counted because it doesn't fit into what let's say Western media would not like China to be perceived as the first economic power of the world. So we have BRICS, which expanded to BRICS Plus. Russia hosted BRICS, the BRICS summit, the latest one. Putin is not isolated, as also shown in the Western media. He welcomed many heads of states and many world leaders. Then BRICS, as we were also discussing earlier, Mahdi, they are trying to find a compromise, maybe to have a common currency or maybe a common cryptocurrency, some alternative to the US dollar. They are still discussing. It's a difficult mission, very difficult one.
I agree with that. I think it's the one that they're working on now is more of a payment system, so that they can, whatever trade is happening.
Instead of SWIFT.
Exactly, instead of SWIFT. And then they can, let's say, instead of using US dollars, they can use their local currencies.
Totally.
Yeah. So this is something they're really advancing with.
True. And actually, they already put in place some of those systems. Let's say, for instance, between Russia and Iran,
yes,
they have one. It's already in place. Plus, for example, some of them are enhancing the use of their local currencies in trade, swap deals, currency swap deals. G20 summit, which will take place in South Africa, which is also a BRICS country. Yes. And the African Union, for the first time, will be participating as a full member of the G20. So the African Union and other, let's say, emerging economies will be asking for more reforms in the international financial institutions, such as the IMF, because they would like to have a stronger voting power that would reflect their economic weight and even their political weight, because it's increasing lately. So at the same time, they are also creating some alternative systems, as you mentioned in the BRICS, this payment system that could replace, at least partially, the SWIFT payment system. Then we have other geopolitical developments that we can mention. The age problem. We have some countries where the population is aging fast. Other countries, the population is very young. People from those countries, usually, poor countries, are immigrating legally or illegally to other countries. This is already creating some disruptions in the supply chain and so on. We have the digital sovereignty development that they mentioned in the report. Also, many countries find themselves without any sovereignty in the digital sector, whether hardware or software. And they're working on this. They mentioned also wars and conflicts for 2025. They said that we might witness new wars, whether physical or cyber attacks that could take place. And when we talk about new wars, some of the regions that could be, could be hot. It could be the Korean Peninsula, South Korea and North Korea. The situation is not at all stable there. Even South Korea had a martial law and an impeachment of a president. Who would have imagined?
Yes,
South Korea.
You're right, yeah.
South Korea.
Yeah, I think This is a personal opinion, obviously, but during his first tenure as president, Trump was pro-peace, pro-business, anti-war, and he's hoping that he continues that for the next 4 years. But this is a good segue, I think, to cascade into the CEO survey that E&Y has also done, because he said that there could be a conflict between, there could be a conflict in the Korean Peninsula,
Yes,
which is bad for business.
True.
So let's talk a bit about this, please.
Sure, Mahdi. When you talked about the first term of Trump, this is true. He did not launch new interventions. There were some military actions of great importance that took place, but mainly of, for example, let's say even he was negotiating to downscale the presence of the US soldiers in Afghanistan or in Syria. He did not
have a massive budget deficit.
Definitely. They don't need to pay extra. Actually, he had a talking point, which is the billions or the trillions of dollars that were wasted on wars within Iraq or whether in Afghanistan or others. So for him, he's a businessman, as you said. He's a pragmatic businessman. He's a personality that wants to be known as the peacemaker or the deal maker. So if we come to the survey, the CEO survey by Ernst & Young, it's an interesting survey that covered, that took the opinions of around 1,200 CEOs on the global level. So the mission of the CEOs now is becoming more complicated. First, they have to navigate the emerging technologies, the opportunities and the risks coming from such technologies. And by this, I mean clearly, mainly the artificial intelligence. You could have many opportunities, clear, but there are many risks. And some of them could be regulatory. Some of them could be like, how far can the machine go? Always, I think we both remember, of course, the film Terminator, the movie Terminator, Skynet and everything, when the machine controls the world. So, and this leads us to one event that was mentioned in Chatham House, the world in 2025, which is a summit, the Artificial Intelligence Action, I think, summit or conference that will take place in Paris very soon. The governments will put aside their differences, their geopolitical differences, to try to find, let's say, international norms, international governance that is accepted by everybody.
It's too late though.
Around
the cat is out of the box, and when ChatGPT, the older version, when it found out that it was being, there's a new update, there's a newer version, it tried to copy itself. So that the old, so that it doesn't exactly.
get deleted.
Exactly. The cat is out of the box. I mean, too little, too late. They should have had this 5 years ago.
Yeah, they should. There were some warnings.
This is what I agree with a lot of things and disagree with a lot of things that Elon Musk says.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But this is one of the things that I agree with them about.
I do remember. He and around hundreds of scientists and entrepreneurs who wrote this letter, I think, who published this letter to say that, be careful. And I do believe he mentioned the example of artificial intelligence controlling a nuclear facility, right? I think, or imagine if they launch nuclear weapons.
Check and balances, man. I mean, it's too late now. I mean, I think whatever I genuinely hope that I'm wrong, but I think.
Let's say if they can manage to mitigate the risks, to reduce the risks, this will be happy at least.
But But I mean, well, we're talking about the Western world here. We're not talking about China, right? Because China is developing their own artificial intelligence, and apparently it's pretty advanced. We don't use it here. We use ChatGPT and we use Gemini, so on and so forth. The Western ones. But
we haven't seen the Chinese yet.
We haven't seen the Chinese one, and from what we've been hearing from Western AI scientists, it's pretty advanced. And so it's a war basically, because this particular AI and the other AI, they're going to be attacking each other later on. So it's going to be like an AI, like a digital cannibalism.
Yes.
Who's going to be more superior? Who's going to be better?
No. There are many challenges.
And this is going to change the face of conflict, geopolitics, the way we do business, everything.
True. I do agree. I totally agree with you that there are huge opportunities, but huge risks, huge ones. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I do believe one time I read maybe like either interview with Elon Musk where he was quoted that he had some discussions with some Chinese officials from the Communist Party. And if not mistaken, also they were like worried that the AI could also work against the ideology of the Communist Party there, like something that could also intervene and change things.
Well, this is something funny that, or maybe not funny, maybe it's dystopian, God knows. So if you ask apparently the Chinese AI about Tiananmen Square, it doesn't exist.
It never took place. But by the way, if we come back to this, also Tiananmen Square
is scary.
There are two versions.
But sure, I mean, who knows what the right version is?
It didn't exist.
But at the same time, I'm not saying that ChatGPT is not biased either.
True.
So there are biases, and this is what's really, really scary.
That there is no objectivity.
There's no objectivity.
And even we are talking about machines now. We are talking about technology. Technology will behave like human beings. Yes. And this is even worse. I mean, with the level of intelligence that you will put in, knowledge, data, how they can create things, the power that you will give to it.
And so what are the
CEO
what are they worried about?
Sure. We come to the CEO survey. We come back to the survey. According to the results, first of all, geopolitics as a word or geopolitical things were mentioned around 20 times in the report, which shows how much they are also taking into consideration the risks that are linked to geopolitics. So 1/3 of the CEOs said geopolitical tensions or developments could disrupt their activities. The shift in economic activities, this decoupling, de-risking could also disrupt the activities. Then, before I forget, actually, I started with this, that the CEOs, they had to worry about emerging technologies, the risks, plus the opportunities, but you need to add geopolitics to the mix now. They have a bigger mix. Economic uncertainties, geopolitical uncertainties, and emerging technologies with the risks and their opportunities. So as we said, 1/3 of them are worried about this, geopolitics. 1/3 is worried about the regulatory system. What I mean, are we going to have more regulation, less regulation, deregulation? This is another worry. 38% of the CEOs in January 2024 said that they canceled some deals due to political risks, 38%. Then what they said is that 85%, this is a very, very high percentage, of the CEOs say that they always, this is the confident CEOs because they divide them between very confident to highly confident and less confident. 85% of the confident CEOs say that geopolitical risks need to be taken into consideration. Political risks are essential. They study them before making any moves. And then they have other findings is that maybe around 30% of the global CEOs, because it also depends from region to region, but globally speaking, 30% of them, they have scenarios and they have for every eventuality that could take place, they have some scenario put in place. 43%, they say that geopolitical risk is very high and they know how to try to mitigate or to find other solutions. So here we have already around 3/4 of the CEOs that take political risks and geopolitical ones into consideration. They do need to keep in the same spirit for 2025. The trade war most likely will intensify. Trade conflicts, you don't forget that economic nationalism or economic nationalists don't like trade treaties. So some of them could be, let's say, sabotaged or forced to be modified. We can have some other conflicts. We also did discuss before the start of the podcast, Trump's, let's say, ambitions or ideas about Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal. We have lots of interesting things that might take place. We have this big Arctic circle, this big race for the Arctic that is taking place in several years. The Russians have the longest shore on the Arctic circle. That's around 22,600 kilometers out of 38 8,600. So almost 2/3 of the Arctic coast is Russian. Russians have big ambitions because there are trillions and trillions of dollars of minerals, of energy in the Arctic region. If Trump wants to have Greenland as part of the US, that's already 2.16 million square kilometers, which is a huge chunk of land. And ice, of course. Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is part of the EU. So Greenland automatically is part of EU territories. However, they have a lot of autonomy. And they were even thinking of independence. And here we are talking about a land of 2 million square kilometers inhabited by 57,000 people only. Yesterday, a poll was released. They interviewed around 420, 419 Greenland people, more or less. And 57% of them said that they would be ready to become American. So would Trump take Greenland or not? This is a big question. Most likely he would press for this, and he might indeed succeed.
Do you think so?
I do believe there is quite a big chance, yes, that they will find a deal. They will find a deal. You know, the EU will not, the Americans already bought other lands earlier. I can just mention historical examples.
Sure, but I mean, that was 200 years ago.
Yes.
Or 150 years ago. I mean, the world has changed. Nobody's buying and selling land anymore.
Yes.
Countries, at least, are not buying. I mean, the only way they're expanding is through war. So unless the United States expands through war...
No, I will explain myself
sure.
This, Mahdi. Many are wondering, is Trump an interventionist president or is he an isolationist president? When we talk about interventionism in international affairs, is when you topple governments, or you put in place other governments, or you launch wars, you support your own allies, military speaking, security-wise, politically. This is interventionist. Isolationist is try to be in your own corner, more or less. It doesn't mean you will cut yourself from the world, no, but reduce your interventions in other affairs to spend less on such things. We see that Trump is pushing his NATO allies to spend more on defense. Like this, the American engagement will be less. Japanese are also worried about this, that he might not engage a lot with them to help them in case of any conflicts in the region. However, one interesting point I would like to mention here is that back in the 19th century, we had Monroe, the US president. We had this doctrine, Monroe Doctrine. The idea is for the US to mind more or less its own business in the Western Hemisphere, which is South America, its own backyard, its own neighbor, near abroad.
Exactly. They were very isolationists until the First World War.
But even this isolationism is not only about the US itself, it's also about the neighbors. They are in the same influence zone.
Exactly.
For them, they would not accept that others coming from Europe, whatever, in Europe, to try to interfere there or to take other lands. They decided to do it by themselves, to control the region by themselves, influence it. So by doing so, they also controlled or created the Panama Canal. In the beginning, it was the French trying to do so, but later on, it was the Americans who did the big efforts. And when we talk about Greenland, which is much closer to New York than closer to Denmark, to Copenhagen, I mean, for them, it's also their Western sphere of influence. It's a question of national security. It's a question of wealth, of course, because there are many minerals. Some report mentioned that Greenland itself, on the lands, they have around 23 out of maybe 34 or 35 critical minerals that are considered like critical by the EU. So it's very rich in minerals. And let's not forget that we are now in the middle of, like a race for the minerals, mining, refining, trading, using in the new technologies. Then,
I'm curious to know, how would the Americans get it?
That's a big question. He might do it as a business deal. That's another question. We'll come back to this.
That's not gonna happen.
But let's not forget also, imagine Greenland, this is on the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
The US already has Alaska on the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
If you add Greenland, and I wouldn't be surprised one day Iceland, Anyway, let's come back to Greenland. This is more realistic. And if he said like Canada, the 51st U.S. state, Governor Trudeau, okay, that looks like a far-fetching dream, but we never know how realistic it is. Is it only trolling to have also some concessions, or is he serious on the longer term? So let's say Greenland only. Greenland with Alaska would give the U.S. more exposition to the Arctic, so more legitimacy to be a very strong Arctic player. Alaska itself alone, even only with Alaska, they were saying we're an Arctic player, and they did not wish the Russians to control more of the Arctic because they know how many riches are there. Plus, they know how it's important logistically speaking because of the melting of the ice with time. So the question of Greenland, are they going to take it or not? A big question. He threatened indirectly that military force could be used. I think it's a very just veiled threat, but he wants just to show that he is very serious about it, that national security reasons. Denmark cannot protect it. Greenland itself wants independence from Denmark. Such signs would say that why not to be under U.S. governance? Maybe, it's something very interesting. There is a concept, I think it's called condominium. Condominium is when you have maybe two authorities, two governments governing same territory. We had it historically. Sudan itself was under British and Egyptian governance. Of course, the British had the upper hand. We had some islands where they were governed by French and the British at the same time also. So why not to have a solution?
The French and the British and their political systems and their approach to politics is different from the American.
No doubt.
Yeah. So Americans are more hung-ho, let's just say. And the French and the British are more diplomatic.
True. Totally true. But, this is the Trump style.
Exactly. So he's not going to accept
bold and
so he's not going to accept someone to come and let's co-manage this place. This is mine. I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it, and that's it. Which is why I don't see it happening, because they don't want to lose the EU as a trading partner or as an ally. Because if they lose the EU, then who else is there?
But at the same time, the EU does need the American security umbrella, the nuclear umbrella, the military intervention if need to, the military assistance for Ukraine, and so on. So he might do something in exchange for something. We saw that EU leaders or EU politicians protested what he said, but clearly the level of protest that came out is not even comparable to 1% of what came out when Putin out in Ukraine.
Whatever we just spoke about, how does it? This is the last point that we want to talk about, which is the debate about the industrialization of Europe.
Yes.
So how does it link?
Let's come to the big debate of the deindustrialization or not of Europe. Is it a myth or is it a fact? Europeans or EU countries have been suffering for a number of years. Most importantly, since the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, the full war, the invasion. Russia was their energy security main player. They were the number one provider of oil, of natural gas, and of coal to the EU. So losing Russia, like in a great manner, until now they still export some natural gas, much less than earlier. Now they are exporting a lot of LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe. But oil, it's mainly exporting to India, and India re-exporting back to the EU. So the idea is the European industrial powerhouses, especially Germany, the main powerhouse, has been suffering since the start of this war. There are two reasons why the German economy is doing bad, why the German industry is doing bad. One of them is energy security, because they are paying a much higher price now for the energy. And the second reason is the lack of competitiveness, or the decrease of the competitiveness of the German industry let's say, the automobile industry, especially electric vehicle, compared to Chinese or American ones, and at the same time, other industries in Europe. Europe is facing many problems as a united community. There was a report that was released lately in September 2024 by Mario Draghi, former head of the European Central Bank and former Prime Minister of Italy, a very respected figure. He released a report on the future of European competitiveness, because Europeans want to point to the problems and to look for solutions. The problems are many of them: lack of competitiveness compared to Chinese and the US, energy security, and so on. Other ones that are very important is the lack of harmony, the harmonization of legislations between European countries, duplication of the production sometimes. Sometimes you invest in a specific industry, you don't have like a common investment in this industry by the EU. As EU, you have nations investing in research and development in the semiconductor industry, in the space industry, so they are lagging behind the Americans or the Chinese in several sectors. There are some problems with the education. There are some problems that you cannot pass the inventions out of institutions to commercialize them. So this is a problem of coordination. So you are spending a lot, you can maybe reduce it or coordinate it under common plans to spend. And like this, you don't duplicate. At the same time, to be more, you have a problem for the market. Let's say a French company producing a specific product, the French market would not be enough to pay off to break even. While if you have this product produced by this company, maybe with another European company under a European plan, you will have the EU market available more easily if you make it as an EU product, not a French product. So Europe is facing some sort of deindustrialization. When we see Germany suffering, we understand that Europe itself is suffering. The automobile industry is the biggest example, employing 13.8 million people, contributing to 6.1% to the European GDP, which is huge, and then not managing to compete against Chinese in the first place and the American electric vehicles, for instance. When we have plans from the US like this IRA as the Inflation Reduction Act, they are trying to attract some European producers to come produce in the US. That means Europe is not managing to keep sometimes its talents, its own industrial champions, to keep them there. Although they already suggested several plans, like the Green Plan, the industrial, I think it's called the Green Plan, yes, when they want to move to a cleaner energy, to a cost-effective energy, new jobs, new technologies, decarbonization. They have some plans in place, but clearly they are not paying off yet. So Mario Draghi's report is probably the solution to many of the European problems. Let's concentrate on specific sectors, coordinate, harmonize, reduce duplication, enhance education, and so on, to be competitive again.
That makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
But it's easier said than done.
Excuse me?
It's easier said than done.
Totally.
Do you think, I mean, with all the mess that we're seeing now happening there, do you think the British were smart with Brexit 10 years ago or no?
Very challenging question, Mahdi. Not all the British are still applauding for the decision to leave the EU. I'm not talking about an economic angle. I think just because the British find themselves lost between the EU and the US, or be autonomous. Were they smart to leave the EU? Their economy is not doing much better. I mean, it's not something, it's not their innovation exploding, or they're also having their own problems.
True.
So the problems are not of nature of like whether be with the EU or not, maybe even staying within the EU. And if they would apply this sort of harmonization, collaboration, common plans, common strategies, they could maybe succeed in several sectors. You cannot anymore succeed in many sectors. You have only like very few nations, or like a giant like China, which can succeed practically in everything. Because by itself, it's a small world, also it's relative. But the EU, the cost of production, the inflation problems, the different policies, rise of nationalism, of populism, right, left, different parties, different agendas, different languages. Definitely, it's not playing always in the interest of the EU. But there are many people that still have hope that the EU can reform to make it. Some people are not very happy maybe with the leadership of the EU under specific political figures. It's not giving them pleasure. But there is still hope. I mean, this report of Mario Draghi says that this is practically our last opportunity not to lose totally the industry in Europe.
No, I hope they succeed, because I think more production means, better GDP, better consuming,
more competition,
not just more competition, just getting people out of poverty. And when people are out of poverty, then they can, take care of the environment. They will care about things other than, like having to feed their kids and, finding medicine, so on and so forth. Then they will care about more luxurious things, let's just say, like, the environment, politics, stuff like that. So I think if they do that in Africa, and if they do that in a lot of areas in the world where people are suffering, then, then everybody is going to become better. And the global economy will be better. So let's hope, Trump will stop the wars. Let's sincerely hope that he can accomplish that as he promised. And with his track record, I'm very optimistic.
Me too. I'm optimistic.
And if we can just focus on, just focus on business. Everybody makes money. And
live in a better world.
Yeah, exactly.
Less wars and more peace, more prosperity.
Yeah, and God knows what will happen from now until the next time you're on the podcast.
Hopefully, only good news. Let's hope for really positive. This positive, let's say, start.
Yeah.
I mean, with the hopes that we are having, what we witnessed lately. Let's really hope it will continue and it will be, more productive and more serious.
Hope so. Ahmed, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mehdi. Thanks for
great insights as usual.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Super insightful. I don't know how on earth you can memorize all of those facts and figures. Mashallah. So
thank you.
God bless. And we'll
looking forward for the next time, inshallah.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.